colonialism and capitalism, but have had little to no representation in elected office. That's about to change in Albany. New York City DSA endorsed candidate Marcela Mitaynes and her deputy campaign manager, Labiba Chowdhury, about their historic victory. We'll also hear from Jackie Fielder, an Indigenous
for its staffers getting involved in the Sunset Park Assembly race this spring against his wishes. The MTA has announced that it expects implementation of congestion pricing, which would impose a toll on cars driving through Manhattan below 60th Street, to be delayed at least a year, primarily because the federal government has not yet approved the plan. New York City has reported an uptick in COVID-19 infections among residents in their 20s and 30s. Governor Cuomo announced guidelines to reopen the state's schools. Under these guidelines and without significant changes in current infection rates, most schools in the state would open for the upcoming school year. Gotham Gazette assessed the path forward in Albany for a new class of progressive and socialist assembly members who unseated incumbents in last month's primary. Mayor de Blasio announced that the Uniform Land Use Review Process, or ULURP, which has been halted since mid-March, will resume in August and be accelerated, though how is yet to be determined. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has begun pressuring Governor Cuomo to tax billionaires, throwing her support behind New York State bills that would impose an ultra-millionaires tax and tax unrealized capital gains of the state's 119 billionaires. The mayor still wants the 1,300 New Yorkers arrested for violating his illegal curfew to face charges. While waiting for the absentee ballots in her election to be counted, NYC-DSA endorsee Farrah Safran Forrest addressed staffing shortages at New York hospitals. And in election news, after trailing on election night by over 450 votes, Marcela Mitaynes pulled ahead of her incumbent, Assembly member Felix Ortiz, by over 200 votes after absentees were counted, leading Ortiz to concede the race and Mitaynes to claim victory. Representative Elliot Engel officially conceded to Jamal Bowman. Khalil Anderson, a 24-year-old organizer from Far Rockaway, appears to have won the race to succeed Michelle Titus in Assembly District 31 of Southeast Queens. City and State recaps the state of New York's congressional primaries. Governor Cuomo and the Board of Elections are being sued by 2 candidates and several voters over the policy of invalidating absentee ballots that were never postmarked by the post office. Councilmember Helen Rosenthal has dropped out of next year's race to be city comptroller. Sean Donovan, housing czar under former Mayor Michael Bloomberg and housing secretary and budget director in the Obama administration, raised the most of any New York City mayoral candidates. However, he does not appear to be opting in to the city's public matching program, and the amount raised by other candidates does not yet reflect the matching. Finally, voting advocates want legislation from Albany to address absentee voting ahead of the November general election.
Yeah, could you play the clip of Marcela on election night? Yeah.
As an immigrant Indigenous woman, to be able to go in and vote and see my name on a ballot. The pushback that the establishment has done, the threat that they felt that I had, the audacity to think that I had a right to this amount of power, shows me, and I hope it shows you guys, what we are capable of. There is so much more for us to do, and I am so incredibly humbled to be working with each and every one of you.
That was New York City DSA endorsed candidate for Assembly District 51, Marcela Mitaynes, on June 23rd after polls had closed on election night, speaking to DSA volunteers. At that time, she was down 464 votes to 26-year incumbent Assembly member Felix Ortiz. But as thousands of absentee ballots were counted last week, Marcela took the lead by 240 votes. And on Thursday, Ortiz conceded the race to Marcela. Earlier this morning, I spoke to Marcela and her deputy campaign manager, Labiba Chowdhury, about Marcela's historic campaign and what it means to have won as an Indigenous Peruvian socialist. Here's that interview. Marcela, you were on the show a couple weeks ago, and one thing we always like to talk about is, how people got into democratic socialism, and you talked about, your identity as a tenant organizer and an immigrant, but I would really love to just kind of hear more about, your identity as an Indigenous woman. Who are the peoples whose shoulders you stand on? I want to hear more about your people and where you come from.
Yeah, so I'm from Peru, and growing up in Sunset Park, it just felt like we were the only Peruvians, and that nobody really knew anything about where Peru was or what it was like. I think folks that did know really associated the Inca ruins, Machu Picchu, which is a very big tourist place. But I grew up, I grew up with grandparents that were very, very tied to their culture, and they made it a really good point that even though this was a new world we were in, that was gonna always play a really big part. They celebrated, like the Independence Day. They celebrated a lot of cultural things that I grew up with. So, for example, we have our own version of Carnival. So one year, the adults were all hanging out, and, they were drinking and partying and having a good time. And I remember just waking up and just seeing like everything was a cloud of white. And I thought I was dreaming, and I went back to sleep, and I woke up the next day, and they were having a party, and they were throwing talcum powder all over the place. But this was part of like the culture and part of like how they celebrated. And so they were happy that they were together. They were happy that they were, sharing in their culture, and it's something that they missed and they were able to do. So there was a lot of that, which made me feel like we were kind of weird because nobody else did things like that. But my grandfather is also someone who made it a really big point of, keeping our culture alive. My grandfather played folk music and, performed, and, he continued to do that here. And he was able to find an audience because there was a yearning of immigrants just like him who wanted to stay connected to the culture. So my grandfather actually helped start an organization that has kind of just like multiplied and has different chapters. Part of it has to do with our culture and our customs, but a lot of it also is very tied to, our Catholic religion. And so this is like an annual celebration that happens. And in Peru, there's like this huge procession throughout the country that lasts for a whole month. And in New York City, it's an event that happens a couple of hours in one day, but it's gotten to the point where the city now recognizes and has been over the years giving proclamations to the Peruvian community. So for me, winning is huge because I'm now sharing this spotlight with my community and my culture. And, it's been amazing to see. I met someone great who works for the mayor's office who is, trying to uplift the immigrant experiences, and being able to connect with him and seeing the customs and our cultures being brought to life and the way it's resonating with folks in this city has been really amazing. So I'm kind of excited about what's going to come next.
And Labiba, could you talk a little bit about how, your path to democratic socialism and how you ended up working with Marcela?
Yeah, sure. I actually got involved with DSA through YDSA in college. So I'm like a student at City College, and YDSA was just flyering, and I happened to see like the fist with the flowers, and immediately I knew I'd found the one. I was so excited to find like an organization that was nationally organizing for a better world, to find like, you know, a community of like tens of thousands of people really trying to build towards socialism. And it was something that I had been really like looking for, like a space I'd been looking for to like grow as an organizer. So, I mean, that's like kind of like how I found DSA. How I got involved with the campaign, I actually was doing a lot of like organizing in CUNY this past year, and the campaign manager Alex like knows me through that and knows like the kind of like base building work that I've done in CUNY, developing leaders and forming chapters basically across the CUNY system. Like, I helped start like 7 new chapters, like, you know, through like Bernie work over the course of like 3 months. So Alex like wanted, like basically came to me and was like, hey, I'm working on this campaign. Would you want to be on? And the more I found out about Marcela, the more I was like, yes, like I would be honored. Literally like Marcela is someone who is like, who's actually won transformative change for the working class. And that's not something many candidates can say. You know, Marcela like helped win the historic like rent laws in June. She's like been an organizer for the past like over a decade. And for the opportunity to like work for a socialist tenant organizer who's like won real transformative change for the working class, like how could I say no to that? So I you know, I was very excited about that like opportunity, and yeah, and then I was lucky enough and to be hired as part of the team, and I'm just so happy to be here and to help help with this campaign, because you know, this is really like honestly historical, like a historical moment, I think, and I'm just so happy to be here.
Yeah, I would love to kind of talk more about this historic moment. You know, Marcela, on election night, you know, talking to, you know, all the DSA comrades, you talked about, you know, this really poignant moment about seeing your name on the ballot as an Indigenous woman. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And now the fact that, you know, you're not just an Indigenous woman on the ballot, you're an Indigenous woman about to head to Albany as an assemblywoman.
It's been a very humbling experience. You know, I grew up feeling like I didn't look like anyone, feeling like I didn't fit in, feeling like nobody really knew where it was that I came from, to really feeling connected to my immigrant roots, specifically because of the community that I work with, feeling a connection, and just, you know, as an adult, being able to look back at that immigrant experience and see things differently, understand a little bit more of the struggles that we went through, because as a kid, you don't really notice or you don't understand. And then to connecting with people and building, you know, this movement together to then be in a position to uplift and inspire people like Biba. You know, this is we were going over the script, and there was that question that was there, and I told her jokingly, I was like, don't tell me, I want to hear it, because I don't really know the story of how she came on board. She was recommended to somebody, and we had the interview, and she sounded awesome, and she understood what we needed to do, and, you know, she seemed like an asset, and she's just proven that over and over again. But to really understand that I was in a position of leadership and folks were looking up to me, and, you know, the fact that this was a very challenging and difficult race, the fact that we knew that there was a chance that we might not win, but knowing the importance of needing to run, knowing the importance of showing folks out there that this is possible, that this is attainable, that this is doable, that we, despite being immigrants, despite having a different culture, despite, you know, having a different language that, you know, we speak aside from English, really inspired me to want to do this. And so, again, to come from all of that, to feel like that you're not seen sometimes, and you're not valued sometimes in the spaces that you occupy, to then walk into a polling site and be able to vote and to see your name on the, you know, on the ballot was very emotional, especially because I think about the sacrifices my grandparents made and how I wish they were here to see this and celebrate. But I'm always thinking about them, and I'm always remembering the sacrifices that they made for us, for their family, for this new country that we so wanted to and are a part of. It just means a lot.
And can you try to maybe talk a little bit, I'm not sure who wants to take this, but you know, what's happened since election night? You know, this definitely has not been the traditional primaries for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, I think for myself, you know, as I've gotten more involved in politics, I had a strong indication that I wasn't going to get an answer on election night, that this was really going to come down to the fight of the absentee ballots. So I was prepared. I know a lot of the staff are just like anxious and wanted answers. And I think that there was a little bit of, you know, of concern when we finished when we had the results on election day, and we were behind by 464 votes. But, you know, it was challenging and difficult. We weren't sure when they were going to start the absentee ballots. We weren't sure how long they were going to last. We didn't know how many volunteers we needed. They were on standby. And then, you know, we finally, early Thursday last week, we got the final absentee count, and that put us ahead by 240 points, which was amazing. And I could hear like the excitement on the voice of folks. And I was just like, guys, you know, like, take it down. We're not done yet. You know, they were, you know, they wanted to kind of like call it internally. And I was like, not yet. I was like, I don't want to, you know, I don't want something else to happen. There were still like 500 affidavit votes and 1,000 votes that were dismissed by the Board of Elections. There were so many things that could happen. I just wanted to, you know, I just wanted to wait until we absolutely knew. And then what, people, like an hour later, I think somebody just sent us a screenshot that the incumbent had, you know, conceded. And I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. Eva, I don't know if you want to share a little bit too.
Yeah, that was honestly crazy. I mean, it was like, so they were doing a machine scan of the absentee ballot, and everyone was taking a lunch break, so everyone was about to leave, and I was like, I think I'm gonna stay. I don't know, who knows when they're gonna finish, like, what if they finish while we're out? I don't want to take the risk. So I was the only one at the Board of Elections, and 10 minutes after everyone left, the employee came to me with a stack of papers with the results, and I was like, of course, this is happening now. So they gave me the stack of papers, and I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I'm alone right now. I need to know. So I look at the margins, and when I saw the margins, I like immediately knew we'd won. Because they were just so big. Like I saw that we had won by 240 total votes, including the in-person votes. And like Marcela said, like she could probably hear it in all of our voices that we were like, yes, we're like, we won. But Marcela was very like reserved, and we're like, okay, we're gonna wait. And then like we see that Felix had officially conceded like like an hour later. So immediately, like, we'd known, like, it all just happened so quickly. Like, after, like, what felt, you know, after days of waiting and not knowing, it was just crazy how quickly it had happened. But I don't know. I think, like, I think this is a testament, though, to, like, how we've run our campaign, because we were in a field of 4, like, progressives, right? And we won by 240 votes. I think that's a testament to how, like to kind of, like, the platform that we've built, but also, like, to who Marcela is as a candidate. Like, we're not saying that we're here to just select one candidate to fix all of our problems, right? We're here saying that we're going to build a movement. And I think, like, this, like, win is a testament to, like, that, like, story being what voters want to hear and what people want to engage with, right? Like, we're here to build a movement together. People know that just electing one progressive with a toothless platform is not enough anymore. They've experienced that. And I think that, like, this election is a testament to that, like, to, like, what we're building together.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of dig into that a little deeper about, you know, the campaign that you built as you were talking to your community. What were the issues that really resonated with them? And now that you're in office, you know, I'm sure you're not just like, okay, cool, I'm going to leave that, you know, whole entire volunteer network behind. You know, how do you plan on mobilizing people and making this, you know, more than just an electoral politics win?
Yeah, so housing's always been an issue in this community, and that's kind of one of the reasons that motivated me to run. It just felt like it wasn't a priority for the incumbent. And I think with all the issues with the pandemic and the quarantine, you know, we've all seen how that's all been exacerbated. And as folks continue to fall deeper and deeper into rent debt, I think that our campaign really resonated. You know, the work that I had done really resonated. And then, you know, our vision of the changes that we deserve is something folks resonated with. It was really exciting to see folks come together to participate in the campaign, to really form this movement that we have. Definitely other issues and other things that we've been involved with and want to continue to work on is, you know, this issue about health, and how, especially now for a community that's predominantly immigrant who already has obstacles to healthcare, how that's a really big and important thing. So really wanting to continue to connect with folks. I've, you know, I envision us continuing to use our organizing skills, and now as an elected official, the fact that I have access to resources to help with that is going to be a real game changer. For us, it was always about building a movement, about building leadership, about, you know, wanting to build a larger coalition to make the changes that we want. So we're really excited about this next phase. We've started talking about how to kind of like use those volunteers to really kind of set up the next phase in the transition part, and really have it be more community-led. And so I'm really looking forward to those opportunities. And we talked about going on a listening tour and bringing folks in and starting to develop like working groups based on topics and themes, and really developing leadership within that to really take us to the next step, which is, you know, eventually going to want to change the legislation that currently exists. So I'm excited.
Hell yeah.
Anything you'd like to add to that about, you know, the campaign, or what kind of your vision is moving forward, Labiba?
Oh, I mean, Marcela said everything amazingly and covered everything. You know, I'm so excited to like build on this like mass working class movement together and to win real like change together. So
yeah. And maybe like one final question, you know, Indigenous people have always, you know, been on the forefront of the struggle, you know, against colonialism and now capitalism. what do you think, in this moment, like, why is it so important that we really center, Indigenous leaders and Indigenous values as we fight capitalism and try to build a different world?
I think part of it is just like really understanding the history of the way this country has been built. And it really starts by, the taking away of the land of the indigenous people of this country that we're at, right? And how their labor has been used to give gains to others, right? And that's just something that's continued to build and build bigger and larger. And I think understanding the root of where things are happening, understanding that it's important to elevate and hear those voices. And it's important to understand that the answers that we're looking for and the solutions that we need to what's happening is really going to come from those folks that are directly impacted. So for me, it's amazing to be able to come somewhat full circle from someone who was very connected and identified who they were and identified as someone who's Peruvian, with those deep roots and the individual evolution of just being here and being growing up in New York City in the 90s and becoming much more Americanized, that I'm still rooted in those values, and to be able to tap into them, to be able to help other people in this community through the organizing around tenant work that I've done, tenant advocacy, and to then just bring it to a larger stage is just very exciting. And I think that it's a learning experience for all of us as we come together to really change the world to a better world that we envision together.
Anything else you'd like to add or talk about? And maybe also how can people, I guess, like, what's the best way? I don't know if you still need any kind of volunteers, or if people want to, get involved in the movements of the things that you'll be fighting for in Albany, how can they, stay involved and follow you? Yeah,
definitely. We're still, we could still use volunteers. We're still having expenses as we transition, and, the fact that we've had to go, I think everyone's contract was only up until the 23rd, expecting things to finish. And now that it's gone much longer, we do have expenses and things that we need to finish and tie up. So if folks want to learn more about the campaign, want to connect with us, want to volunteer, want to donate, just go to our website, Marcela for NY, and that's Marcela, MarcelaForny. And you can find us on the internet, and we also have Twitter handles, social media.
Wait, MarcelaForny.org. Sorry.
Sorry, yes. No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for asking us back. This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I look forward to, covering the DSA slate going to Albany moving forward.
Yeah, we're on pins and needles for the other three now.
You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on all your favorite podcast apps. If you appreciate this kind of content, giving a space for Indigenous socialists to talk about why they're running for office and reporting that actually covers organizing on the ground, please consider giving to the station and supporting shows like Revolutions Per Minute. You can call 516-620-3602 or go to WBAI.org. Again, that number is 516-620-3602. Please support this work that we're doing to cover organizing happening in New York City and beyond. Today, we're talking about Indigenous socialists that are taking ballot boxes across the country by storm. Earlier, we heard from Marcela Mitaynes, but she is not the only Indigenous socialist running for office this year. DSA endorsed Jackie Fielder, an Indigenous Two-Kettle Lakota Hadassah Mexicana who is running for state senate in San Francisco, California, is also been endorsed by New York City DSA. I spoke with her earlier this week about her run and the history of the Dakota Access Pipeline and what she's running on. Here's Jackie.
I'm speaking with Jackie Fielder, who is running for state senate in California. She's a member of the San Francisco DSA and has been endorsed by that chapter and also nationally by the Democratic Socialists of America. Welcome to RPM, Jackie. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, so one thing we always kind of like to start with our guests is to kind of like hear how people's journey into democratic socialism. And so I'd love to hear, kind of, why you joined DSA and chose to, run as a democratic socialist in this time.
Yeah, honestly, this all goes back to my own politicization back in probably 2014 when that particular wave of the Black Lives Matter movement took hold across the country. And that was right in the wake of the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And I just remember being a sophomore in college at that time, marching with my students, led by Black students, and really wanting to commit my life to racial justice. Fast forward to after graduation, the issue of police violence became really personal for me. I was watching over the summer and the fall of 2016, my own relatives facing down the barrel of guns and militarized law enforcement at Standing Rock as they protested this multi-billion-dollar pipeline set to go through our ancestral territories. So my grandparents grew up on reservations in North and South Dakota. Their tribes and the people there are affected by this pipeline because the Missouri River provides the only source of fresh water for them. As we know, recently it was really exciting to see the court decision to demand that the company, review its initial environmental impact statement. But anyway, I wanted to find the answer to the question of who is profiting from this kind of state violence, whether it's prisons or pipelines, and the common denominator were Wall Street banks. And so I traced the flow of money back here to our own city budget, which is, of course, it's decided, as far as the spending, and it goes to parks and rec and affordable housing and even the police. But while we're not using the $6 billion pooled investment fund every day, it actually sits in dozens of Wall Street banks, which, as we know, invest all over the world in these horrific projects. And so I wanted to divest our city monies from these Wall Street banks and invest in a bank owned by the city. And that, of course, is a public bank. So we founded the San Francisco Public Bank Coalition in the wake of the Standing Rock movement. And, since then we have been pushing this idea pretty far across California with our partners in Public Bank LA and the California Public Banking Alliance. Shout out to Trinity Tran. But last year we passed AB 857, which is this bill to provide a pathway for public banks. And DSA has been, a part of public banking in my efforts at every single step of the way. I was also a part of the DSA's, the local chapter's opposition campaign against the local police officers association's dangerous use of force policy. This was in 2018. We went toe-to-toe with the most powerful lobby in this city. We were outspent 10-1. I had the honor of co-managing that campaign, and we won. We united the city against this encroachment on our police commission. And, since then, the Police Officers Association has had very little power over our local politics, which is an exciting development. And so my coming into DSA and understanding that we need democratic socialism comes from my own personal experiences of witnessing state violence in service of private interests.
Yeah, and I can actually say that some of that, defund Apple movement that, so many of you were really leading on the West Coast actually kind of is sort of my path a little bit towards DSA. Like I was already doing anti-fracking work, and like in that moment kind of, I guess it was like the beginning of 2017 was kind of finding where I wanted to be organizing, and New York City DSA here was doing a lot of really great defund Apple work. And that's kind of how I got looped into the eco-socialist, chapter and doing that work. But I would love to maybe, I know you touched on it a little, but kind of hear a little more about your reaction to, the major victory that did just happen really recently with the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, I personally know people that have left the Standing Rock Indian Reservation because they are afraid to raise their children near this pipeline that could burst at any moment. And so the court's decision to, demand that the Dakota Access Pipeline Company shut off the pipeline is significant. Whether they will do that is another question. I know Kelsey Warren, the CEO, has said that he will not shut it down. And so we'll see, if a militarized law enforcement presence goes to Kelsey Warren's home and makes him shut it off. But, I understand that they have until 2021 to review their environmental impact statement. And, these are small yet big victories. It's kind of hard to understand how to feel about it after our people have been just through so much trauma, even in this episode, in this battle of the Dakota Access Pipeline, not to mention everything else with respect to Indigenous people. But, I'm hopeful. I don't think that this decision would have been made had it not been for the water protectors who sacrificed their lives on the front lines. When they were going up, standing there peacefully and prayerfully, standing in the face of riot cops, they didn't know if the guns that were aimed at them had live ammo. And obviously there's a delicate and violent history between Indian resistors and the federal government, going back to the American Indian movement and COINTELPRO and the FBI and all of that. And so there was always that fear. And so I have immense respect for anyone who stood on the front lines there. But the movement continues. There's for every win for these pipelines, there's also many more being approved. And that's why I'm running on dismantling as much fossil fuel infrastructure in my home state of California as possible. Other than that, it's also coming out of the No DAPO movement. We've seen just an amazing rise of our generation's next leaders. Dakota Access is a good friend and born and raised on Standing Rock, is only 16, but is just, traveled the world and talking about climate change and centering Indigenous and frontline communities. And it's really just empowering to see our people rise up to meet the challenges of this century.
And so here in New York, we have kind of a slate of, DSA endorsed candidates. It's looking actually, we have Julia Salazar already in our state Senate. Looks like Jabari Brisport will be joining her, and possibly 3 other folks in the assembly. It's all very exciting. What does the California government look like right now? Would you have other DSA comrades? Are there other Indigenous women? Kind of what does you running represent right now?
Yeah, exactly. I was just telling someone, can you imagine if we had, fingers crossed, New York DSA gets all of the candidates from this year in there. Imagine if we had 5 socialists in the state legislature. Right now, we barely have 1 renter in the whole California state legislature. I can't think of a single legislator that has refused contributions from the start of their campaigns from special interests, corporate interests, real estate lobby. Like, California has been for sale for so long, and the establishment politics here are highly entrenched, especially in a place here like San Francisco, District 11. I from the start have pledged to refuse contributions from law enforcement unions, even challenging my opponent and getting him to budge a little bit on that. And he said that he would donate about 1/3 of what he's received from law enforcement unions since his first campaign, and then attacked me for doing the same, which I would never do. But California has 40 state senators. We have 40 million people roughly. So each state senator represents 1 million people. The jurisdiction is so large. Like, as Governor Newsom has said previously, it's like the nation state of California. Everyone likes to point out that we have the 5th largest economy in the world, but not a lot of people know we rank among the bottom in the nation for per student spending. We also rival Florida and Louisiana for having the highest poverty rate in the nation. The wealth inequality here is just so stark. And I would consider our district as ground zero for that wealth inequality, where in the Bayview and the Fillmore districts, which are our last Black strongholds in this district, the average median income can be around $30,000, while just across the street in a different district that's predominantly, white, the median income can be somewhere like $100,000 to $120,000. So the cost of living is obviously on people's minds every single day. It's just a struggle to keep up, and it doesn't feel like many legislators actually care.
You've been listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast apps. I'm Lisa Zishi, and I've been talking to Jackie Fielder, who is running for state senate in California. Jackie, can you talk a little bit maybe about how your campaign has had to shift with all that's going on with not only, the COVID pandemic, but also these uprisings, for racial justice and against police brutality?
Yeah, so just a little bit of background about this election. I announced my candidacy pretty late in November of 2019. Our primary was in March of this year. And so we only really had 100 days between the time that I announced and the time of the primary to get second place. We have jungle primaries here in California. And so the top 2 vote getters, no matter what party, move on to November. This has been an advantage for, I know, my insurgent campaign. And, we only had about 50 days of talking to voters on the streets or handing out literature at their doors. And in those 50 days, I was expecting to get something like 20% of the vote, being a first-time candidate, being a very grassroots funded candidate, going up against someone who has had a 15-year political career, is a corporate Democrat, has no qualms about accepting contributions from really any industry. And we got 33% of the vote. You should also know that these districts are just massive. And we also have, relative to New York, as I understand it, we have a higher turnout. And so 33% of the vote here amounts to 99,000 votes. We have about, 250,000 people that vote in the state Senate race. We're expecting about 430,000 people to vote in the general election. And so I moved on from March with 33% of the vote. My opponent got something like just short of 56%, which is absolutely not a mandate, especially for someone who has been pretty productive in the state legislature, although I would argue productive for the wrong interests. And the Republican got, I think, somewhere around 11%. Fast forward to right after the primary, basically, we were confined to sheltering in place. And we were like, well, what are we going to do? Our whole thing has been an emphasis on field, talking to voters on the ground, canvassing, door knocking. Now, of course, this is a gigantic district. And we just decided that we're definitely going to continue talking to voters one-on-one. We're just going to continue to phone bank. And so pretty much like the candidates in New York, we just shifted a lot of our energy to prioritizing phone banking, which is going pretty well. On average, we'll call 4,500 phone numbers. But at this point now we're shifting to not knocking on doors, but leaving brochures at people's houses. And a lot of people confuse that for mail, which is understandable. But we have volunteers drop off brochures at people's houses. That's really all of the might and muscle that we put behind the primary. So we're pretty confident in this method. And, we have now 77 days until ballots drop. around October, early October is when ballots will begin to be mailed to everyone. Thankfully in California, our legislature and governor understood that we needed to transition quickly to everyone vote by mail. You don't have to request a ballot. And so we're hoping that, enough people get mailed a ballot where the projection for turnout is the same. But in general, I've always said at the beginning of this campaign, you never know what's going to happen. We've always been a long shot campaign. My opponent is the most real estate backed politician in California, the California legislature. He is a known workhorse. And again, I think for the wrong interests, like real estate developers and law enforcement unions and fossil fuel corporations and so on. But we also have just the coronavirus pandemic has laid bare all of the